Welcome to Worth Your Time with your hosts from the nationally syndicated Bob and Tom Show, Kristi Lee, and the president and CEO of the Indianapolis Zoo, Dr. Rob Shumaker. Our mission to inform, entertain, and educate with guests from all aspects of life. We guarantee there isn't another podcast that features two hosts with such different backgrounds and discussions with remarkable people doing exceptional things. So let's get started. Here are your hosts, Kristi Lee and Dr. Rob Shumaker.
Thanks, everybody. We are so happy to have the second podcast episode with Dr. Charles Foley, senior conservation scientist at the Lincoln Park Zoo, elephant expert, and one of my best friends and best colleagues. Charles, we are so excited to have you back for episode 2. How are you?
I am very well, Rob and Kristi. Thank you so much for having me back again.
Oh, it's such a pleasure. So what is the best story you two have together?
Oh, gosh.
You spent a lot of time together. What stands out for you?
It's not really a story, but I can tell you what stands out for me. My wife and Charles' wife get along famously. Mm-hmm. My daughter and his daughters get along famously. My poor son is a little bit out of luck with it because he's outnumbered. But when we get together, we all just split and go in our own directions. And Charles and I can talk forever. Huh? And my wife, Anne, and his wife, Laura, can talk forever. And the girls talk forever. And it's fantastic.
Well, what happens to your son?
He's off at college. But actually, when he's with us, he tends to hang more with me and Charles.
Oh, okay.
Which is wonderful.
Yeah.
Oh, I know. Wait. Oh, I know what the story is. Oh,
what?
Wait. Charles, you have a good one.
I was going to say that one of the best times I remember together.
I know what you're going to say.
You came to visit us.
That's right.
Out in Tanzania.
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
And we went out to the Simanjiro Plains. This is out in Maasai land.
This is the best story.
And we had some of our village game scouts who do anti-poaching patrols and wildlife monitoring in the area. And they're all Maasai. And they brought a goat. They slaughtered the goat.
Live
cooked the goat.
Came with us.
We ate the goat. Yeah. They named the goat, didn't they?
It was, yes. No, the girls did. It was Bulls or something like that.
It was something like that, yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
It was sad.
Yeah,
They'll
but Cuddles
remember.
did it. But yes, and then afterwards, we started telling ghost stories.
That's right.
So we would have, it's like the Maasai village game scouts, that they would speak in Swahili and we would translate into the English. And it's like we went backwards and forwards telling ghost stories, sitting around this African campfire, etc. That was a wonderful evening.
But I will add a little bit of detail because it is one of the best moments ever as a father and a husband. And we were out in, I don't know where it was except Tanzania. Charles took us. And it was small. I think it was just our families and 3 or 4 of the Maasai men. And we were in tents. Mm-hmm. And of course, it's hard to imagine what the stars are like because we don't see that here. It's unbelievable. And to stay up in the middle of the night in Tanzania, everybody's sitting around a campfire, eating goat and telling stories. And it was one of my son's favorite memories ever because he stayed up all night eating roasted goat with a bunch of Maasai men, and it was fantastic. But to me, what was incredible about it is it's just the most perfect example of what it means to be human, is to be up, to be around a fire, roasting food, roasting meat, and telling stories. That's what our species is. Mm-hmm. And that was thing for me. Yeah, I as soon as you started, I knew that's exactly the story you were going to talk about.
That's beautiful.
That's fantastic.
Do the Maasai have... Okay, I'm going to go off onto my little tangent. Do the Maasai have a ghost that they...
Oh, man.
Is there like Bushman or so? I don't know.
No, there's no one
right.
bogeyman that they believe in. And most of them will say, oh, I don't believe in ghosts. But let me tell you. And then they proceed to regale you with this very detailed story of some ghost.
You're both scientists. Do you believe in ghosts?
Oh. This is a long story because I had to tell that story around that campfire. I definitely do.
Really?
And I've seen the same one several times.
Okay, that's for another story. Okay, that's another story. All right. Interesting.
I don't.
Okay,
No,
fair enough.
he doesn't.
Fair enough. Do you have any hobbies?
Yes. Yes, I do. I have a hobby, perhaps my wife would call it an obsession,
Yes.
and it is mammal watching.
Oh,
See, I knew it.
mammal watching. I thought it was going to be golf, bowling.
Charles has no hobbies.
You have bonsai trees.
Yeah, very few hobbies. Charles has no hobbies. He has mammal watching all around the world.
That's okay. So explain what mammal watching would be to our listeners.
So basically, everyone's heard of bird watchers, right? People go outside, they look at birds, they might travel around the world looking for birds. Mammal watchers, we do the same, except it's for mammals, and we're generally better looking. The difficulty about mammals is that half of all mammals are really small, really hard to identify, and really hard to see. So we're talking bats, rodents, shrews, moles that live on the ground, etc. Right? And 60% of all mammals are either nocturnal or crepuscular, which means they come out like during the dusk or dawn. And so, again, they're just really hard to find. So being a mammal watcher is not easy. And over the years, technology has really helped us to be able to find mammals. And of course, the main thing out there is the internet. Because in the past, let's say someone went to northern India and they saw a red panda. They might write it up in some little magazine, but unless you happen to find that particular magazine or happen to know that person or know their contacts, you just wouldn't find out about it. Now, with the internet, someone sees a red panda in some place in northern India, they can put it online. It's accessible to anyone. And we've also started getting more technology that helps us. So, for instance, thermal images. These are these images that they detect heat. So if an animal is going around, it will pick it up even in pitch black, and you can see the heat signature. And it'll pick up anything from a mouse to an elephant. And also things like cameras, which can now take pictures effectively in pure darkness. All of these things have really helped. And more people are starting to travel around the world to look for mammals.
Most unusual. Oh, I'm sorry.
No, Charles, he's being so modest. I can't believe he's not telling you the truth about mammal watching.
Because I know he's done like 60 in a night or whatever it is. And
so
yeah.
he and his wife, you two currently hold the world's record for number of species in 24 hours. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Were you not?
There's some debate as to it. There was a group in Kenya, but we've rewritten the rules so that in our favor, so that we are still the record holders.
Well, and they are not on the podcast, so we don't know that.
No, we don't.
That's right.
So you're our winner.
So you win.
Yes.
So I think you need to at least help us understand. And by the way, let's give your wife Laura credit. It was the two of you, and you did a 24-hour marathon mammal watching session, and you hold the world's record currently.
Correct.
I think we need to talk about what your wife does, because it's not like she's a banker and she goes out and watches mammals for 45 days at a time or something.
It's so rude. I'm going to answer something for Charles about his wife.
Okay.
I don't think, could you have found a more perfect spouse? She is phenomenal and shares your passion for mammal watching.
Yes. I don't know how I got so lucky.
How did you meet her?
I don't know how either. I don't. No, I do. Of course, I
met her in Tarangire. She came and she worked with me for a couple of months out in the field. But after, what was remarkable is actually after our engagement night that she actually stayed with me, because I almost killed her on our engagement.
I did hear that story. I did listen, and I heard that. I don't know if you want to share that real quick, but man, you're right. She said yes and then still hung in there. Whew.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Do you want to share that with? Yeah,
well, you can't leave us hanging.
You've got to share it with our listeners.
Okay. All right.
Accidentally almost.
Yeah, you didn't. Yeah, it was an accident.
So what happened was that we were living in New Jersey at the time. I was finishing up my PhD, and so we came back to Tarangire National Park to put some radio collars on elephants. And we went out, we put the radio collars on the elephants. I had bought Lara the ring. And so on the final day, we drove out to the middle of nowhere in the park, and we got on the roof of the car, and I proposed to her, and she said yes, and it was all very romantic, and the sun went down, and it's all wonderful. And then we got down from the car, and we had a flat tire. So I said, no problem at all. I will deal with this. So I went to deal with it. And what had happened, because the car had been sitting in storage for 7 months, one of the nuts had rusted onto the bolt. Ooh. And I could not for the life of me get this thing off. And you have to appreciate that I am way too cheap to wreck a good tire by driving on it. I said, well, we have two options. We can either stay in the car all night, and it was an open Jeep, but I'm hungry. So I think we should probably just try and walk back to the lodge. And so we agreed to walk. And then it was a case of, okay, what direction do we walk in? We could go straight to the lodge. It was about an hour and a half walk. But the problem is that it was over open swampland, no trees, no bushes. So if anything came for us, we would be in a bit of a pickle. The other way that we could go was to go to the park headquarters. And that was in an area, lots of bushes and lots of trees. But the day before, we had seen a big pride of lions right on that road. So thought about it a little bit and said, okay, let's take the lion route.
That's the obvious choice.
Yeah, of course.
The smart choice. Uh-huh.
The smart choice. And this was one of those African nights where there was no moon and there was just a tiny little bit of cloud, enough to cover most of the starlight. And so it was like pitch black. We had no flashlights. We were wearing shorts and a T-shirt. And so what we did was we just filled up our pockets with rocks and we started walking along, singing lustily to make anything aware that we're coming and hopefully scare it off. And we were doing great. Yeah, an hour had gone by. We were everything's rosy. And then all of a sudden, I look up in the sky directly above me, and I noticed that the sky directly above is much darker than the sky on the sides. We had walked right into a herd of bull elephants. Oh. So I grabbed Lara and I said, run. And we ran and we sort of hid at the base of a tree, and we could hear these elephants like all around us for about half an hour. After which we looked at each other and said, okay, I think it's all right. Let's go. So we eventually make it to the ranger post, and I bang loudly on the door, and all hell breaks loose. I can hear sort of people leaping out of bed. I can hear these AK-47 guns being cocked and whatnot. And I said, wait, it's me. It's Charles. And they say, Wana Tembo, which was my name in Swahili, Mr. Elephant. I said, yes. And I said, Charles, we damn near shot you. So anyway, they were very nice. They provided a vehicle. They took us back to the lodge. But the real kicker was that by the time we got back to the lodge, dinner had finished. And so we didn't get any food anyway. So all we had was a plate of French fries and a cocktail.
There you go.
But you have a great engagement story. Nobody can top that.
Fantastic.
Yeah. What is your name in Swahili?
Wana Tembo.
Wana Tembo.
All right, so you got
Is that why we call it Tembo Camp?
Yes, exactly right. It's a word for elephant Swahili.
I did not know that. Yeah. I just learned something today.
So we need you to circle back and fill us in on your other big distinction of record-breaking number of observations of mammals.
Yes. Oh, goodness. Yes. All right.
And it may surprise you. People don't do that a lot.
No.
So you've got to explain it. Just set the stage a little bit.
Okay. I'll really set the scene over here. I'll take you back 100 years because it all started with the birders. And it started in New York. And people would go out in New York and they would shoot as many birds as they could. And mammals as well. If they found a mammal, they shoot it too. And then in the end, whoever had the largest pile of dead things was the winner. Now, after a few years, they realized this wasn't terribly sustainable. And so then they started saying, okay, we're not going to actually shoot them. We're just going to count how many different species we find. And so birders since then have been going around and they do big bird days. And they'll do it in the big bird day in a state, across the whole country, across the world, etc. So there's all sorts of big bird days. And I remember sitting around a campfire in the Serengeti talking to he was a tour operator, a tour guide. And he was saying, my clients have seen 40 mammal species. This is wonderful. And so we started talking about how many mammals might one be able to see in 24 hours. And I said, I think you might be able to see 50 mammals in a day. And he said, absolute nonsense. He had been out for 2 weeks and only seen 40 mammals thus far. But the bottom line is that most people are not going out at night and they're not concentrating on the small things. So my wife and I decided to try it. And we went out. We spent 24 hours in the Serengeti and Ngorongoro, at the end of which we saw 42 different species of mammals, which was amazing. And then we sort of wrote it up in a birding magazine, who are the only people who are interested in this feat other than my mother. And we forgot about it for about 10 years when some people out of California went and matched our record.
How dare they?
How dare they?
Oh, we hate them.
Right.
In a temperate region.
Mm-hmm.
And, if there's one thing that going to English boarding school taught me, is that you need to tilt the odds in your favor whenever you do something, right? And so we found a friendly billionaire who had a piece of land, private land, next to the Serengeti. And we got permission to do a big mammal day over there. And at the end of that big mammal day, we saw a remarkable 60 mammal species.
Yeah.
But it didn't end there. We actually did it again in Tarangire National Park with a good friend of ours, Brendan Simonson, and we ended up beating the record again. We actually saw 64 mammal species, which, if you think that there are only about 65 mammal species in the whole of the UK, it's quite a remarkable record. And it just shows how diverse the mammal assemblage is in places like the tropics.
What was the most unique mammal?
Oh, hands down, the aardvark.
Really?
That's fantastic.
Yeah, the aardvarks, and there's an aardvark at Indianapolis Zoo, and I would encourage anyone to go over there and hang out with this aardvark. It is such an amazing animal, and they have an elephantine-like snout, and they have the most incredible claws, and they will dig for termites. And they can make a hole in the ground in 3 seconds flat. And they've the most astonishingly powerful claws.
And they're huge.
But
they're huge animals.
Yeah.
really big,
I've met
huge
ours.
ears.
Yeah.
Yeah, but then they just go bumbling along. They're the nicest animal. So that was an absolute highlight. Yeah.
Wow.
Do you have a favorite animal besides the elephant?
I don't. It's whatever animal is next on my mammal list that becomes my favorite animal
Do you have
until I've
pets?
seen it.
Do you have pets?
We have a dog. Not quite sure he actually knows he's a dog, but he's a little rescue corgi, Pippin. And he's still trying to figure out what being a dog is all about. But yes, we do have him.
So we should not let it pass by without mentioning how people can access more about your mammal watching.
Oh, absolutely,
experts.
yeah.
And we talk about your podcast. It's a great podcast.
Yes.
Yes, if you want to learn about where you can go and look for mammals, there is a site called mammalwatching.com. It is run by a very good friend of mine called John Hall. And people go over there and they post mammal sightings and they post trip reports, etc. And you can also listen to the podcast. Again, it's mammalwatching.com. It's one word. And you can download that on Spotify or wherever you get your podcast from.
And you and John are the co-hosts of the Mammal Watching podcast.
We are indeed.
And you do it brilliantly.
Is there now a competition between the mammal guys and the birding guys and gals?
Yeah, but I think it's only from the mammal side. I think the birders are not quite sure what to make of us. But we interviewed a fascinating chap recently. His name is Peter Kessner. And Peter Kessner is on the cusp of seeing 10,000 different bird species.
Wow.
Right?
Wow.
And there are only about 11,000 different birds. Now, my colleague John, he is the number one mammal watcher. He's got the biggest mammal list. He's seen about 30% of the world's mammals. That's the real difference, that it's so much harder to see the mammals because they're nocturnal or they're very small or they're bats and hard to identify, etc.
How far have you gone to see mammals?
Oh,
How
this is a
far?
great answer.
Oof. So a recent trip that we did, probably the furthest I've been, was to Irian Jaya. So this is West Papua. So it's the Indonesian side of the New Guinea Peninsula. And it was a fascinating trip for a couple of reasons. So one reason was that no one ever went to New Guinea to look for mammals because it was just common knowledge that you never saw mammals in New Guinea because they're eaten, right? It's a major source of protein over there. So mammals are extremely rare. And yet we have a friend, he's a bird guide. His name is Carlos Bocos. He's a Spanish guide. And he would do bird trips to this area. But at night, he would sneak out with a thermal imager and he started seeing mammals. So he said, look, we really need to go over there and do a proper mammal trip. And we came up with a list of about 70 mammal species that we could potentially see in this area. And in the end, we saw 62 of the 70 mammals, right? It was astonishing. But I have to tell you about the most crazy mammal that we saw. So it is an animal called a long-beaked echidna. Now, an echidna, it's a monotreme. It's an egg-laying mammal, right? So very primitive. There's the echidnas and the duck-billed platypus, right? Mm-hmm. And echidnas on the Papua Peninsula are extremely rare. If you look at the red data list for the description of the echidnas, it says that no scientist has seen it for 50 years, right? The Western long-beaked echidna. And we knew that wasn't correct because Carlos Bocos, the guide, he had found one village where a couple of people had gone there, some foreigners, and they'd seen it. And so we thought, okay, we're going to go back to that village. But a few months before we were going, Carlos wrote and said, look, guys, the echidna's disappeared. No one's seen it. So what he did was he sent out some of his assistants to go around all of the villages in the area and just ask, hey, you guys seen an echidna? And eventually he found one village called Klalik village where they said, yes, they had seen an echidna and they were seeing it fairly regularly. So we agreed to go over there and we showed up. It was about mid-afternoon and it was a wonderful scene. There was all the village elders were there. And the head woman of the village, she was all dressed up in her finery. She came and she put a garland around Carlos's neck. And they invited us to plant a tree because we were the first foreigners ever to go to that village. And we waited until nightfall. And then we went out and we went into a clearing in the forest. And every adult male and every child in that village was standing in that clearing and they all had a flashlight. And when they saw us come, they turned and they just disappeared off into the forest to look for this echidna. Wow. And they were determined to basically find us this animal and put Klalik village on the map. So we were just meandering around looking for wildlife for 1 hour and then 2 hours and 3 hours and then 4 hours. And each time we'd end up going back to a little open area in the forest at the base of the hill. And after 4 hours, we started thinking, okay, this isn't going to happen, when all of a sudden we heard the yodeling. And that is how they communicate at long distances. It meant someone had found an echidna. So we were ridiculously excited. And we went rushing off with a guide. And 15 minutes later, we came to an area, there's people standing around. And I look down and I see this animal. It's about the size of a small dog. It's got little spines on it. But I couldn't figure out what was the front end and what was the back end. Because what happens is that the echidnas, when life isn't treating them very well and when they're scared, what they do is that they put their beak, and they've got this like long beak, it looks like a bit of a carrot, a bit like a carrot, and they just stick it in the ground and they puff themselves up and they kind of hope that the world goes away, right? And typically what the world does is they pick the echidna up and put him right in a pot, which is why they are vanishingly rare. So we sat there and we were quiet and the echidna just pulled its beak out of the soil and just came bumbling along. It walked right over my feet. And we followed it for about 20 minutes and then we let it go. And we were elated. We were so happy. And then over the next couple of days, John and Carlos and a few of the other people we were with, they started posting pictures of this animal on social media. Now, we went in June of last year. What are we now? January. Mm-hmm. In the past 6 months, Klalik village has received over 60 foreign guests who have all come just to see the echidna. This is bringing money into the village. They're now starting to use that money to buy mattresses. So, for instance, they put us in a little hut that we just slept on the floor, etc. So now they're upgrading it, mattresses, mosquito nets. They have started up a little chicken farm so that they can get meat and eggs. But the best thing of all is that the villagers have decided that they're going to ban all snaring of mammals on their village land for fear that the snare might either kill or injure an echidna, which is in effect the golden goose. And it's just so heartening to see that a little village in the middle of nowhere, which previously would see an echidna simply as being protein, as food, is now looking after these animals because it means just money coming in and economic development for them. And we're hoping that this is going to spread to other villages, that they will also look after their wildlife.
A conservationist's dream, right?
It is indeed.
Yeah.
It is indeed.
That's a wonderful story. Man.
Yeah.
It's fantastic. What I can't help but think about is, Charles, you are linked to so many conservation success stories like this, and I know you won't mention it, but I can. That you mentioned the golden goose, but I think you have the Midas touch when it comes to impacting animals and advancing conservation. As we wrap up, can you just talk about what you've done for elephants and habitat corridors and the state for elephants in Africa right now?
So, going back to Serengeti National Park, which is where I spent 25 years working, studying the elephants. What's interesting about Serengeti Park is that every year, the wildlife in the park, almost all the wildlife, moves outside the national park onto community lands. So national parks in Tanzania, they don't have fences around them, right? I can't think of one that has a fence around it. So the animals can just move in and out. And when it rains, the animals move. They move long distances. They can move 60 miles to the north, or they move to the east, and they'll cross two big tarmac trunk roads, migrating up to calving grounds. And when it dries up, then there's no water over there, then they move back to the park. And the reason that they move is because the soil outside the park has a much higher mineral content than soil in the park, particularly phosphorus. So they really need to move to these areas to get enough phosphorus to breed. The problem, and when I say that lots of animals move, we're talking about 80,000 animals are moving. And this includes elephants and buffalo and the zebra and giraffe and lions, etc. And over the years, what's happened is that agriculture has moved in, and many of the migration corridors in this ecosystem have been lost. So there used to be 9 corridors. There are now 4, 2 of which are under real threat. Fortunately, though, the predominant tribe to the north and the east of the park are the Maasai. And the Maasai, they are traditionally pastoralists, right? They're cattle people. They have the cows, the goats, and the sheep. And historically, the Maasai do not eat game meat, right? So they've never hunted wild animals. And that is one of the main reasons why the Maasai tolerate wild animals so well. But the problem that the Maasai have is that they need fairly large areas of land to be able to move their cows, because rainfall can be sporadic and you might get a lot of rain in one area and nothing in another. So they need to be able to move their animals across large distances. And they are losing their land as well to the agriculture. They will come and then find some of their best dry season lands have been plowed up. It's now a big field over there. So they were looking for ways to try and protect their land so it could be just used for pastoralism. And so we started working about 20 years ago with a wonderful organization called the Ujamaa Community Resource Team. It's a local NGO. And to try and find ways that we could help the local communities to prevent farming from coming into their lands. And one of the very clever chaps NUCRT, discovered that there was a legal way of protecting land. It's called a Certificate of Customary Right of Occupancy. It's a bit of a mouthful. It's a CCRO. But the way it typically works is an individual's lived on a piece of land for a while. He'll go to the district after 20 years and say, hey, I've lived over here. Can you demarcate this area and give me the title deeds? So he gets a CCRO. But what this chap discovered was that a community can own a certificate of right of occupancy. And that's important because the Maasai, they own land communally, right? If you're a pastoralist, you can't split up the land into tiny pieces. You need everyone to be able to access everything. And over time, working with the local communities, started setting up a few of these CCROs, and the bylaws of these are such that the land can be set aside for certain purposes. So this is pastoralism and any local needs, but no agriculture and no settlement. And this has really taken off. The communities really love this because they retain full control over their land, but they can keep agriculture out. And over the last 10 years, over 1.5 million acres of land have been set aside as these CCROs. And that is land that is open pastoral land, but it means that there's no agriculture, there's no fences. And so the wildlife can use it too. So it's a big win for both sides. Mm-hmm. And indeed, the wildlife population in the ecosystem, despite the fact that they move in and out of the park twice a year, crossing main roads, going to areas where there are no anti-poaching wardens, etc., numbers of animals have either stabilized or are going up. So it's really quite remarkable. Once you get the community on your side, you can really achieve great things.
So, Charles, for people here in the U.S., what's the number one thing they can do to support elephant conservation?
To be honest, there's two things that you can do. One is, obviously, you do not buy ivory. And I know some people go abroad and they see something that's made of ivory, think, oh, that'd be nice, they buy it, etc. But you have no way of saying whether the ivory that you've bought has come from a poached elephant or not. But the other way is to support a local nonprofit organization which helps elephants. And in many people's communities, that will be the local zoo. So the Indianapolis Zoo, for instance, has been supporting our elephant conservation work for over 20 years now, I believe. And many zoos across the US, they have conservation projects that they support, and they raise significant sums of money to put into conservation in the wild. That is probably your first port of call. Go to your local zoo, see what projects they have, and give your money through them.
Charles, I got to tell you, you're just such a brilliant guy and an effective guy and an optimistic guy, and just been so good to talk to you. Always great to hear your insights, and just can't thank you enough. He's definitely been worth our time.
Oh, definitely worth our time. I hope to meet you in person sometime soon. I have a daughter that lives in Chicago. I'm up that way a lot, and the Lincoln Park Zoo is a very wonderful place.
Absolutely.
And we visit a lot, and this has been wonderful.
Yeah. Charles, you're just the best. And go ahead.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I've really enjoyed the conversation. You are wonderful hosts. I've been scribbling down notes of the things I should do in our podcast now. So now that I've seen how the true experts do it, we're going to have to revisit our style.
So you didn't mind being our first?
I will tell you,
I was honored.
Your podcast is terrific. Encourage everybody to try Mammal Watching. It's terrific. And Charles, you're just the best. And thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
I'm going to go out and look for mammals today.
Absolutely. There you go. Go and do a big...
I would, man. I'd be out there looking for him. I love it. Yeah.
All right, big mammal day.
I
Yes.
forgot. Quick. What's the number one mammal number one on your list still?
Oh, that you haven't seen?
The holy grail of all mammals is the okapi, which is this wonderful giraffe-like antelope that lives deep in the forests of DR Congo. But it lives in an area where there are lots and lots of rebels. And even though we've been trying to get in there, everyone says, don't come. So that is the number one. However, my next trip is to go to Ivory Coast, and I'm looking for some species of duikers. And these are like little deer and there's one called a zebra duiker and a black duiker and a gentinx duiker. That is what we'll be looking for.
How many mammal species are there?
There are about 6,500 mammal species at the moment.
You got a lot of looking to do. You better
There's an awful lot of looking. Absolutely. Yes, indeed.
All right, so everybody Google Okapi, OKAPI. They're as marvelous as Charles says. And Charles, you're the best. Thank you. Thank you, my friend.
Thanks, guys.
You've been listening to Worth Your Time with Dr. Rob Shumaker and Kristi Lee. If you like what you hear, please give a review wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget to tell your friends. Word of mouth is the best compliment. Thanks to our producers, Chris Spangle of Leaders and Legends, LLC. You can reach him at leadersandlegends.net. Also, thanks to Sophie Ritz. I'm Christopher Geisen. Thanks for joining us.